Today on The Global African, we've got a special episode for you. We'll talk about the life and legacy of Malcolm X. That's today on The Global African. I'm your host, Bill Fletcher. Thanks for joining us. Don't go anywhere. We're joined by Davon Love, the Public Policy Director of Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle in Baltimore, Maryland. Thanks for joining us.
Appreciate the invitation.
So, February 21st, 2015, 50th anniversary of the assassination of Malcolm X. For many years, Malcolm vanished from public discussion. In the late 80s, early 90s, he reemerged. What was the impact of Malcolm and his legacy on the work that you've been doing in your organization?
Well, one of the central tenets of our organization is the idea of cultivating the importance of independent Black institution building as the fulcrum for any other justice work that's being done. You know, in the broader left, you know, there's oftentimes the conceptual blind spot for the importance of Black self-determination. There's lip service given to it, but in terms of the importance of that, that's something that's oftentimes avoided because I think there are ways the left perpetuates white supremacy in the sense that they want Black folks, people of color, to be a part of the intellectual and political machinery the left builds, where, you know, usually you have white folks that are still in control of those institutions and control the political agenda, you know, attempt to speak on our behalf. And so I think Malcolm X represents that strong voice that says, while it's important to criticize, you know, global capitalism and colonialism, it's important for people of African descent to engage those criticisms from the perspective of understanding the importance of independent Black institution building. And really, our organization conceptually, when we formed it, one of the things we had in mind was the organization of Afro-American unity and thinking about what its goals and missions were and wanted to really have that as a core feature of our paradigm for how we engage our work here in Baltimore.
Malcolm was taken from us in 1965. This is 2015. I mean, what are the relevant lessons from Malcolm's life as you look at the terrain, which is vastly different from 1965?
Absolutely. So one of the things that I think often happens with Malcolm X's legacy is that people represent him, you know, as this firebrand who, you know, went and just cussed out white folks, and, you know, but if you really watch him, you know, he was very composed, very disciplined, but made the arguments, right? And was very precise about making the arguments. I think oftentimes there are folks who purport to be activists that go into those arenas, you know, and they want to just be abrasive, you know, because they think that that's what Malcolm represented. But if you really pay attention and study Malcolm, you understand that his precision in argumentation, but his being poised and disciplined is what gave strength to what he represented. And so I think that's something that we can certainly take from his example and I think would be very beneficial to a lot of aspiring activists and organizers.
One of the things I thought about in reading the biography of Malcolm by Manning Marable was The Life of Reinvention, it was called, was the challenges of building organization and the difficulty of charismatic leadership and organization building. And so Malcolm is killed, his organization falls apart fairly rapidly afterwards. What do you make of that?
Well, I certainly think one of the things that this generation needs to learn from is that dilemma when you have such a strong charismatic figure, and that being the life and death of an organization. It's not a sustainable model. And there are many examples. I mean, apart from Malcolm's organization, you know, there are a bunch of examples of organizations. It's not sustainable to have that form of leadership. And so that's where, you know, legacies of people like Ella Baker and others are important in thinking about organizing, the importance of horizontal leadership. But I do think one of the things that Malcolm's legacy teaches us about that, it teaches us the way that people navigate schisms in leadership and perspective. You know, when you think about, for instance, you know, when Malcolm left the nation, you know, and the schism
the Nation of
Islam, you know, between him and Elijah Muhammad, you know, I think there's something instructive, you know, about, you know, what that schism was about, you know, about the way in which, you know, Malcolm kind of developed a broader vision of the potential of the notion of independent Black institution building and Black self-determination and what that looks like. And I think a part of the problem that you have is you have people that think there needs to be one leader, or one perspective. And so even in that, I think we can see the problem with having such an autocratic leadership style where there's one person at the helm, because it just facilitates, dissension, and it doesn't really cultivate the kind of democratic leadership development that's more sustainable than that kind of singular messianic leadership perspective.
Let's go back to this issue you're raising about independent institutions. We are in a country that is not majority black, it's not even close, yet a country that I would argue, and many other people would argue, that was constructed not simply with us at center to it, but with the oppression against us as being a central mortar that holds things together.
Absolutely.
So we have, but we're a minority. And when we're thinking about building power, there's other forces that are out there that we have to somehow figure out a relationship to. Mm-hmm. Do you see in Malcolm's legacy an approach towards others, or do you think that he was restricting himself, and I don't mean that critically, mm-hmm. to the black experience?
Here's what's interesting about that is I think a lot of people frame notions of black self-determination, black nationalism, as if black folks who have that perspective are saying we're going to isolate ourselves from the world. And I think, when Malcolm, goes to Africa and parts of Asia and then comes back, people perceive his change in perspective to be, I don't dislike white people anymore. I don't think they're the devil anymore. We should work with white folks. What he's saying is that the notion of black nationalism, Pan-Africanism, is a way to relate to the world, so that as we're building power amongst ourselves, it becomes an essential component as to how we relate to all these other forces, all these other forms of domination, militarism, capitalism, all these different forms of domination that manifest in our society. The notion of independent black institution building is something that helps us deal with those things in a way that gives us some kind of self-reliance and self-determination, so that we're not having to capitulate to a civil society. And like you mentioned, before, this society is structured on blackness being represented as anti-human. It's predicated on the notion of people of African descent as not being able to marshal the institutions of civil society to protect our self-interest. And so really at the heart of addressing this larger imperial machine is to develop independent black institutions from which we can navigate the coalitions that we develop in a way that gets at the heart of what built America in the first place, in part in terms of the material acquisition of wealth, in terms of the common representations of African descended people. I mean, this gets at the heart of our ability to deal with a lot of these larger issues.
So before we let you go, we want to take a look at this clip from Malcolm from towards the very end of his life, and be interested in your reflections on this and what it means for us today. So let's take a look.
All right, cool.
We don't care what your religion is. We don't care what organization you belong to. We don't care how far in school you went or didn't go. We don't care what kind of job you have. We have to give you credit for shocking the white man by not letting him divide you and use you one against the other. The Organization of Afro-American Unity shall include all people of African descent in the Western Hemisphere. In essence, what it is saying, instead of you and me running around here seeking allies in our struggle for freedom, in the Irish neighborhood or the Jewish neighborhood or the Italian neighborhood, we need to seek some allies among people who look something like we do.
All 2015.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting listening to that after what we were just kind of talking about, because I mean, that's exactly the perspective that I think is necessary to really get some change is, for us to seek allies amongst ourselves as the basis for seeking allies for other, from other people.
But how can it be a linear thing? I mean, just in terms of, I'm a little bit older than you are, and for years people said, first we've got to get ourselves together, and then we can work with other people. But do we ever get ourselves together such that we can then say we are really united and now we can go out?
Right. Well, I don't think it's a linear process, like we do this first and then that. But I'm saying in terms of the emphasis, that there needs to be emphasis put on developing collective power amongst ourselves as the basis for how we interact with others. Because I think too often there are folks that seek allies to the extent that they become dependent on their relationships with other people and other interests. And so the more dependent you become on other people and other interests, then the less interest it is, self-interest you have, and the affinity to the group that you represent. And so it's not a linear thing like one first and the other, but it should be the basis from which we organize with other groups.
Mr. Love, thank you very much for joining us.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Yeah,
Appreciate your time. And thank you for joining us for this segment of The Global African. I'm your host, Bill Fletcher, and we'll be back in a moment. February 21st, 2015 represented the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Malcolm X, El Haj Malik El-Shabazz, assassinated in the Audubon Ballroom as he was preparing to give a speech in Harlem, New York. The legacy of Malcolm has been the subject of widespread interpretation over the years, despite the fact that many people have looked to Malcolm as a great hero, including your host. There are differences that exist as to how to interpret his life, how to interpret the lessons of his life. And it is that we're going to pay attention to today on The Global African.
One thing that I found in all of my travels was that all of the Africans, not only the Africans, but the Asians and the Muslims, look upon us as their long-lost brothers. And America had actually tricked many of them into a hands-off policy by giving them the impression that she was honestly trying to do something to solve the problem. My argument over there was designed to prove that it is impossible for the United States government to solve the race problem. It's impossible.
Are you prepared to work with some of the leaders of the other civil rights organizations?
Certainly, certainly. We will work with any groups, organizations, or leaders in any way, as long as it's genuinely designed to get results. Assalamu alaikum. Mr. Moderator, our distinguished guests, brothers and sisters.
We're joined for this segment with Angel Elliott, a producer and host for almost 10 years in the entertainment industry with work on networks such as BET and MTV, and is a freelance pop culture columnist for Complex and Vibe magazines, among many. She currently works as a producer and reporter at The Real News Network. We're also joined by Anton Warrenchuk, who's a producer at The Real News Network. He studied Black liberation theology and the civil rights movement with James Cohen at Union Theological Seminary. Welcome to The Global African.
Thank you.
Why another documentary? I mean, there's been a number of documentaries on Malcolm. So what was it about this?
Well, not only is it the 50th anniversary of his assassination, but also it's timely. You have a new movement of Black American liberation, Black Lives Matter, with what's happened in Ferguson with Mike Brown, with what happened in New York with Eric Garner. I think that people's fervor for civil rights has been reignited, and I think that Malcolm's message is one that is timely for this generation to hear. So I think that it was a good time to, bring it back.
Anton, what did you discover in the process of researching for this?
Well, I think that maybe the most important thing that we discovered, and the point that we wanted to make in the film, is that Malcolm's legacy shouldn't be reduced to his rhetorical powers, which are extraordinary, but they shouldn't be reduced to simple slogans such as by any means necessary. They need to be understood in the complexity of his political thinking. And the other thing that I think we really wanted to get at is that a lot of people look at his legacy and they remark that what should be understood is, often I've heard, is his capacity for self-transformation. And I think that what this remark does unintentionally sometimes is denigrate him, because it almost seems as if what should be remembered about Malcolm is his ability to admit that he was wrong, or that he was always able to somehow get past some sort of inadequacy of his of either his relationship with the Nation of Islam, or his the theology that he promoted as part of the Nation of Islam. And I think that what we wanted to emphasize is that what's so central to Malcolm is his internationalist perspective, and as well as that his thinking and the things that he espoused publicly were always connected with creating an international struggle, especially with Black people in America.
Angel, how do you want this video to be used?
I want it to be used as a teaching tool. A lot of people from our generation, folks that are younger than us, like Anton said, only know by any means necessary. They don't know that, towards the end of Malcolm's life, he was going towards this internationalist perspective. They don't know a lot about him. So I want it to be used as a teaching tool. I want it to remind Black people who we are and what our history is beyond the moderate message that they try to put out about Malcolm now today. That's how I want it used.
So we have 3 clips that we want to take a look at, and just your responses and seeing them from different segments of Malcolm's life. So let's just take a look at the first one.
Mr. Muhammad teaches us that man is judged by his conscious behavior, and the conscious behavior collectively of the white race toward non-white people has been the type of behavior that is practiced only by a devil or devils.
So then in essence you feel that white men per se are devils?
He teaches us that God told him that the white race is a race of devils.
So that period in Malcolm's life, I think that we can see how the theological ideas that he was espousing and that he was promoting on behalf of the Nation of Islam and Elijah Muhammad wasn't really yet, I think you could say, the culmination of a liberation theology that he would promote. Because these kinds of theological things that he would say never entailed an intervention of people, never entailed the intervention of Black people to change their political or social circumstances. The Nation of Islam, the kind of theology that they promoted was that God will take care of it, that what we need to do is form a unity among Black people and then wait for God's vengeance.
It was apocalyptic.
It's very apocalyptic. And I think that this was something that even at that time that Malcolm would say these things, there was something that he was kind of getting at the limits of, the constraints of it, because he had privately said that he wanted to intervene in the lives of Black people. He wanted to politically organize. He wanted to stand up to the forces that he identified as the oppressor. And I think that this kind of theology it showed the limits of what it meant to adopt that kind of faith.
Let's go to another clip.
I feel responsible for having played a major role in developing a criminal organization. It was not a criminal organization at the outstart. It was an organization that had the power, the spiritual power, to reform the criminal. And this is what you have to understand. As long as that strong spiritual power was in the movement, it gave the moral strength to the believer that would enable him to rise above all his negative tendencies. I know, because I went into the movement with more negative tendencies than anybody in the movement.
Angel.
I think that in this clip, I know that in this clip, Malcolm X has split from the Nation of Islam, and at this point he is completely disillusioned and awakened to what the Nation of Islam has become, and to what his former leader Elijah Muhammad is. He felt it was not only a shock to him, but it kind of, broke his spirit where the NOI was concerned when he found out about Elijah Muhammad and his indiscretions with his secretaries. And, you know, so at this point he's saying, you know, this is what the nation is. I've helped to create what they've become, but, you know, I can't stand for who they are. And he's coming out against it.
I, for one, disassociate myself from the movement completely, and I dedicate myself to the organizing of black people into a group that are interested in doing things constructive, not for just one religious segment of the community, but for the entire black community.
And I think it's also, it's at a moment where, well, to take a step back, I mean, Malcolm had been struggling with the Nation of Islam. He knew that they talked a tough talk, but when it came down to the idea of self-defense, when it came to politically intervening in the lives of black people in America, that the Nation of Islam, they weren't doing it to the level that he wanted to do it. He wanted to become part of the daily struggles of black people's lives in America. And in the Nation of Islam, he saw that it had this tremendous capacity to elevate people who were involved in what he called self-destructive tendencies. But because there were so much internal contradictions, there was so much jealousies, and there was a lot of concern among the leadership where Malcolm had the limelight, that Malcolm was becoming the center of the attention. He knew that this spiritual power that he said the Nation of Islam had, that it would collapse and it wouldn't be able to do that anymore. But more significantly, it represents the fact that the Nation of Islam was not able to intervene and do the things politically that he wanted to do.
And he looks different.
Oh, he looks much different at this point.
He's more like
Not haggard. He's more rough. You know, he doesn't look as straight cut and polished as he did.
Well, maybe I'm a little bit biased because I see a goatee and I identify that, which is one of the reasons I have a goatee. But it's the look, the change in the look is not just that he hadn't shaved for a while. I mean, there was a definite decision to alter himself. It was part of this evolution that he was on, or a journey that he was engaged in.
I think we can ascribe these changes in his physical appearance to the fact that he adopted a much more orthodox Islamic faith. He had just, a few months before had returned from Saudi Arabia and the Hajj, and I think that this change is in part because Malcolm wanted to find, and he wanted to find an authentic existence. He wanted to find that authentic existence for the black person in America. And part of that was adopting what he saw as a kind of the right faith, the right practice, the more global identity, the more Pan-Africanist identity.
Although the irony, and this would be for a longer discussion, is that the particular branch of Islam that he was exposed to in Saudi Arabia was Wahhabist, which is not known for being a liberation theology. So there's a contradiction between Malcolm's growing revolutionary nationalist and Pan-Africanist orientation and a particular branch within Sunni Islam, which was very conservative.
I think in part that when you see Malcolm talk about that experience and what it meant to him, it wasn't couched in that kind of complex or
I
terminology
of
theology. It was in the notion of brotherhood.
It was much more that we could cover, but I want to thank you both not only for being on the program but for doing this video. So thank you both very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us for this episode of The Global African. I'm your host, Bill Fletcher, and we'll see you next time.